away. Know how proud is.
What's up? Listen, I got to tell you this. I have a problem with people calling the tech that is amp captures modelers. Okay, people like Tom running around saying amp modelers and amp modelers, and you don't even know what they are. Okay, so let me start by saying I grew up in an age where there was no digital. There was literally nothing digital when I grew up. Nothing. There were no cell phones. There were no video games. There were no computers. There were no Pro Tools. There was nothing. When we recorded on tape. We literally recorded on tape. And the only way you could edit the tape was actually by physically cutting it. So, and when I grew up, when you bought an amp, you bought an amp. You didn't buy anything but a physical amplifier. There was no effects in it. There was no reverb, tremolo, but there was nothing digital about anything. There was no digital anything when I grew up. Okay. So I know I was there when this digital stuff started coming out. And there is a difference between a modeler and an amp capture. There's a big difference between a modeler and an amp capture. There's a huge difference. And people just seem to be conflating the two. They seem to be thinking that, oh, well, it's an amp modeler when it's an amp capture being played back. And that's not what an amp modeler is. See, okay, look, let me just explain this to you from a historical standpoint, okay? Direct experience from me, okay? There were no digital amplifiers, nothing. The first one that came out with that I would call an amp modeler is the Tom Schultz Rockman. It was his idea of what an amp should sound like. And it was in a little box like this. It was like a little tiny square box. And you plug into it. I think they were like 120 bucks, something like that. You plug into it and you would get the Tom Schultz sound. That's an amp modeler because he's modeling an amp to sound like what he thinks an amp should sound like. That's a modeler. And then the one that exploded, that wasn't the one that exploded. That was popular. Okay, I hated those things. Okay, I hated Rockmans. I would not come near. If anybody used a Rockman, I'd be like, dude, I don't know about that. I wouldn't be using that. I would try something else. You know, I would steer people away from a Rockman. Okay, did not like them. I don't like them to this day. I like Tom Schultz's guitar sound. I don't like Rockman's. The one that blew up, the digital amp that blew up, the digital modeler that blew up was Line 6. Line 6 was the first company to ever come out with an amp that was just basically a solid state power amplifier in a digital chip or digital program that you could switch amps through. That was, and it was huge. I mean, because it was so cheap, because it was just a speaker cabinet with a small amp in it that had a power amp, and then it had the digital. You could dial up your amp sound, and you could dial up effects in it, and it was like $200. And they just, I mean, I was working in a music store at the time, and we sold so many of these amps. Oh, we sold so many of these quote unquote amps. I didn't like them. I never used one. Like I never bought one. At that time, I was into 59 bass bins. I was into hand wired Marshalls. I was into all the old tube amp sounds, you know. So I never used. I just said, no, I'm good. I'm good. Okay. So Line 6 was the first company to ever come out with amp modelers. Okay. And here's the difference. Let me explain to you the difference between an amp modeler and an amp capture player. Okay. An amp modeler is what a human being thinks an amp sounds like. And then he makes a program, a computer program to make it sound like that. Or he designs a circuit to make it sound like that. Okay. This is a good example. This is a Carl Martin Plexi Ranger. This is made to sound like an amp. This is an amp modeler. This models an amp based on a human's idea of what they think the amp sounds like. That's an amp modeler. Okay. This is an amp capture player. This does not model an amp. This doesn't do any modeling of an amp. What happens is the computer listens to the amp and then it comes up with its idea of what the amp sounds like. That's the difference between an amp modeler and an amp capture. The amp modeler is what the human being thinks it sounds like, and the amp capture is what the computer thinks it sounds like. And the thing with the computer is it's capturing the sound of your specific amp. That's what's so great about it. So if you have a specific little Fender Champ, you can't play a Fender Champ live. Well, unless you're mic'd. You can do it live with a mic. Still difficult, but you can do it. Let's say you love that sound. Well, you can capture that sound with a Quad Cortex, a Kemper, whatever, a Tonex. You capture the sound. The computer listens to the amp with this bizarre, it puts sounds to the amps and it does all this crazy stuff. And then it comes out with an idea of this is what your amp sounds like. That's not a modeler. That's not a modeler. This is a modeler. This models the amp. This captures the amp and plays it back to you. That's the difference. But they just call these things they just call them all modelers. Let me show you. If I said to you, hey man, hand me the phone. And I hand you this, and then somebody else goes, hand me a phone, and I hand you this. Right? Hand me a phone. Okay, there's a phone. There's a phone. This is the amp modeler. It's a modeler. This is the amp capture, but they still call it a modeler. That's my problem. Just like you call this a phone and you call this a phone, but they're completely different. This phone right here, if I say, hand me a phone, I can hand you this. Hand me a phone, I can hand you this. That would be correct because they're both called phones. But think about the difference. And that's the difference between an amp modeler and an amp capture device. This is an amp modeler and this is an amp capture player. They're different, but you're calling them both modelers. That's my problem. You can't call this an amp modeler. It's not an amp modeler. This doesn't model an amp. This captures an amp and replays the exact sound of the amp, except it does it better. It does it better. This sounds better than an amp, by the way, because I've messed with this thing for a while now. And I can get sounds out of this. There's a clarity to this amp capture playback device. There's a clarity to these things. There is a fidelity to these things. There is a sonic continuity with these things that you don't get in an amp. There's a depth to these things that you don't get in an amp. You can't get it. And think about this. If you're a guitar player, you're playing in Nashville or you're playing at a place that has a PA, you could literally put this in your backpack with 2 cords and have your guitar. And I mean backpack, I mean the flap in your gig bag. Put this in your gig bag with 2 cords, put your guitar, carry it on your back, and walk into a gig. You don't need it. You don't even need an amp. You could literally play with this at any place that has a PA. You could walk in with just this. And this stores like 200 amps. I mean, I think 20, this store is 20. In the program, you can have 200. but there, you can put 20 amps in this thing. So you could literally go from gig to gig and just change your amp right here. Walk in with one distortion sound, walk in with one clean sound. It's amazing. It's amazing. So to call this a modeler is just, it's not true. This is not a modeler. This is a modeler, and this is an amp capture player. But it's harder to say amp capture player. Just like it's harder to say, oh, can you hand me that that handheld device? Can you give me that handheld device? You go, no, give me the phone. But is this really a phone? Hey, I got an amp modeler. Is this really a modeler? No, it's not. This is not an amp modeler. That's what you have to understand when you're playing with these things. And I can tell you this. I don't like the FR cabs. I don't like them because they dictate to you what your power source is, your power amp, and it dictates to you what speaker you're going to use. So what I've been doing is I got this Carvin Mach 100 right here, which is 50 amps, 50 watts per side. So you can have 50 watts up here and 50 watts down here. It's 100 watt total. This is a 50 watt amp right here in one channel. You plug it in right here, 50 watts. So you plug this into this and this into your speaker of choice, your speaker cabinet of choice, which I have a 115 cabinet to plug this into. It sounds fantastic. And don't underestimate how much your speaker, makes your sound. Your speaker makes a huge part of your sound. So if you were to plug this into a 12, it would sound different. Plug this into, I have a 210 cabinet I plug this into. Screams. Then if I want a rounder, kind of more mid-rangey sound, I plug it in my 115. Then I got a 410, a Marshall 410 I can plug this thing into. Give me a bigger, fatter sound, but it still has a lot of high end and beef. So that's why I don't like the FR cabinets, because I can just get my power from here, and then I use my own cabinet, my own speaker choice. And then I use whatever amp I want on here. I mean, it's amazing. Think about it. These things capture the exact sound of an amp. How many times are you going to be able to play a Dumble amp? But you can play what this computer thinks a Dumble amp sounds like. And the computer is so close. It's so good. It sounds so good. It's like an AI picture. It's like an AI picture. Think about it. If you typed into, beautiful girl on beach in bikini, and you look at the picture it comes out with, but type this, nothing but beautiful girls in bikinis on beach, boom. And then walk into a real beach and see how many girls look like that. Not a lot, but you can make an AI picture where they all look like that. The AI can make a picture that looks, every girl in there is gorgeous. And this computer that reads, that captures the amp in a way that the real amp itself can't even reproduce. It's a picture of that amp. It's a digital picture of that amp. And then you amplify that digital picture, and that digital picture sounds so good. It sounds so good. That's what I'm using in the clip. That's why I put this clip in there, because that's what I'm using at the thing. You can hear the dynamics of it. It goes up and down. You can play it harder, and it'll react like an amp. Now there is the slightest bit of dynamics that you do sacrifice. Like a tube amp is the tiniest bit more dynamic. But guess what? A tube amp has a bunch of anomalies in it. I have tube amps where if I play two notes at the same time, it pushes the air so hard that it almost sounds dissonant. I have tube amps that have ghost notes in them. You play a note and there's a ghost pitch that comes on top of it that's not equal to the same pitch, and it clashes. I have tube amps that have sounds that are in the real high end realm that you just can't get rid of. You just don't hear them live because they get drowned out. The amp capture player doesn't have any of that. It takes all that out, and it gives you the best sound from that amp. And don't get it twisted. Don't be fooled. All these guys that claim, oh yeah, those modelers, and once again, see, modeler's a misnomer. This is not a modeler. But if they were to tell you, oh, those amp capture devices, they don't come close to an amp. I can put you in a room with 10 sounds and you would never be able to tell this from a real amp. You would never be able to do it. You couldn't do it. You couldn't pick it out. You couldn't pick it out. This thing sounds so real, especially through headphones, man. If you put headphones on this thing, it sounds better than any amp. It sounds better than any amp I've ever heard. And like I said, I grew up in a non-digital age. I have heard every amp you can think of. I've heard all the Marshalls. I've heard all the Fenders. I've heard all the Boxes. I've heard all the matchless when they came out. I was listening to matches. My buddy had one right when they first built them. I've heard them. I've heard all these amps. They sound good. There's nothing wrong with them. But to say that an amp capture device is not as good is just not true. It's just not true. Not only is it as good, it's better in a whole bunch of regards. You know, the other thing you can do is if you're really into a tube sound, right? You can put a tube in front of this, like a tube preamp. There's pedals that have tubes in them, specifically to warm up your sound. There's also ones that kind of give you an overdrive effect, which you could use. You just take the overdrive down and you just use it as a tube to get that tube sound, and then you go through here. So if you're in love with the tube sound and like you can't leave it behind, you can plug a little tube pedal. You can plug a little preamp into this actual tube. Like, so you plug into that, the pedal runs it through the actual tube, then it runs into here, and you get some sponge, you know, that specific sponge, that specific glass kind of sound from the preamp into this. And it sounds better than a tube amp. So my whole point is, don't call this a modeler. Not that you're not going to, because you're going to, but in your mind, just make sure you understand this is a modeler. This models an amp. This captures an amp and plays back the capture of the amp. And it's a completely different thing. All right, guys, that's it. I'll see you next time.